What happens now moving forward in terms of, first and foremost, these separated families? Do you have any optimism that those 2,000 children are going to be reunited with their parents?
I hold out optimism, if only because I think that the public pressure has had some effect. Perversely, as you mentioned at the top of the show, there's now this kind of choice that's being offered, which is like you can get your kid back if you agree to be deported and you renounce all your claims to asylum. So I think a lot of people are going to be deported, reunited that way. But it's going to take sustained public pressure. I mean, what's very clear is we broke a story a year ago when they first started thinking about this policy. And they thought about it, and they crafted internal procedures about it, and someone leaked us documents because
This is the separation policy.
Child separation policy. People were so freaked out about it, and they cogitated about it for a year, and they implemented it. They had no plan to reunite these families. They had no plan because they didn't care. I mean, that's what I think is so shocking about this whole thing.
How did it go from, so 2017 you break this story. Obviously it takes, up to near a year to come through. Were there people in the administration who knew it would play like this?
I think so, and I think the reason that it didn't happen was precisely because the experts, there are people who work in the Department of Homeland Security and in the asylum office and things like this who understand that you can't do this. And I think they warned against it successfully. I think the president, in a fit of pique recently, has been ramped up about how stressed out he is about the border and the invasion and the infestation that's coming over it. And I think he managed to prevail on his advisors against a lot of the better judgment of the civil servants in those agencies to start doing this.
So then he signs an executive order, which ostensibly says we're going to get these families back together. He says, on television, he just couldn't, it was too awful to have families be separated. What do you think happened there for him to ultimately reverse himself? Although we are hearing whispers now that he's saying he wishes he hadn't done that.
I think the president sits in the White House and watches cable news all day.
Yeah. Good for you.
Good for us, maybe. Bad for the country, probably.
And probably not a ton of MSNBC.
Yeah. Although I more than I think he would ever admit.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's times where it's very clear. He does a lot of hate watching.
Yeah.
Which again, if you're hate watching, cool. Like we're whatever. I don't judge.
They all have to watch the commercials.
We make no discernment. No, I mean, basically, I think he's sitting there and he's watching himself take a beating on this in public opinion and feels like he has to walk it back. And I thought it was a significant moment in the history of this administration because we've seen him penned in before by the courts, when they came in against the travel ban or DACA. We've seen him penned in by Congress when John McCain gave the thumbs down for ACA. This was really the first time that I felt like civil society, in a broad sense, basically kind of stood up and said, no, you can't do this.
You mentioned civil society. I will segue to civility. That seems to be the conversation today. It's a tricky thing to talk about because I think we all would expect to be treated civilly. Like we all want that. How do you feel about right now a Republican saying that there is now a lack of civility?
I mean, look, I understand. I want to acknowledge what you're saying, which is I get people's impulse, and I don't think it's a bad impulse to have of don't yell at people or be, I get that. That's a human and understandable part of people's impulses around this stuff. And generally, I think that's a good guiding post for people. I will say this, that look, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, for example, is one of the most powerful people in the world. And in a very real and tangible sense, the defining feature of a free society is that you can tell one of the most powerful people in the world in your government, get out of my restaurant.
Right.
That's genuinely a thing that makes a free society. And now, people can say that I don't think they should do that or that's rude, and I totally get people on either side of that. But in a real deep sense, hectoring, yelling at public officials, I covered all the Tea Party town halls of 2009. That was a festival of yelling at public officials. And in the same way, that's actually an important right to preserve. So I think sometimes this conversation about civility can paper over a lot of what is actually just what politics looks like.
And, I feel like lost in this, obviously, Sarah Huckabee Sanders in her tweet framed she focused on her own politeness and politely leaving.
Right.
It does seem as though she was also politely asked to leave. Now, now again, at the end of the day, I think if you're asked to leave a restaurant, you don't look back and go, they were so nice about it. But
they did comp them the cheese plate.
Yes. Yeah, that's no small thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But You know, and it did strike me as interesting that the woman who owned the restaurant, she went and asked her staff, and she made it very clear that she had she had an ethnic staff, she had a staff that were gay people on her staff that made it difficult, and she actually asked them their opinion, which
And I thought it was, look, again, I feel like my basic principles here are nonviolent action in dissent or in protest, sort of across viewpoints, is part of what American political life is about. And, you know, that's like, and I think people feeling moral urgency about a 12-month-old who's sitting in some facility 1,000 miles away from her mother, who's been torn away from her. I think feeling some sense that, like, this is a crisis, this is a moral crisis that requires me to take some extra action, again, within the sort of confines of, what's protected under law and our democratic sort of principles. I think that makes a lot of sense.
It's always so great to have you here. Thank you so much for making the time
you,
for
man.
us. Chris Hayes.